The Massachusetts legislature takes another step closer to banning handheld cell phone use while driving. The state Senate recently unanimously passed a bill making handheld cell phone use illegal. Last month, the House passed its version of the bill. Connecting Point's Ray Hershel sat down with State Senator Eric Lesser and State Representative Lindsay Sabadosa to talk about the specifics of the measure and why legislatures are optimistic the bill will be enacted into law this time around after previous failures.
The legislation is aimed at really preventing people from being on their phones while they're driving. So it's about hands-free driving, right? We already have a law that says you can't text while you drive, but of course phones and technology have evolved. So this legislation would really say you're not allowed to have your phone in your hand except in the case of emergencies. And there's a one swipe rule. So you can swipe to deactivate your phone, to put it in driving mode, but really you're supposed to keep your phone out of your hands, and it would allow police to pull people over if they notice that they're driving down the road holding their phone, which is something, if you travel across the state, you see quite a bit.
Now, the House passed its version in May, the Senate more recently in June. Senator Lesser, what are the main differences between the House bill and the Senate bill, which recently passed?
Well, they're actually fairly similar. So, I think we're pretty confident that it'll get done this year, and the governor will be signing it hopefully soon. I think everyone agrees this is a very important issue. There are a few things I think people should pay attention to. One was, for example, whether or not this should be a surchargeable offense for insurance purposes. I think where the Senate ended up is by the third offense, that third and subsequent offenses would be surchargeable on auto insurance. The first two, there would be a fine, but it wouldn't apply to insurance. I think that's the right balance. I think you want to give the law time to let people know. I think it can be excessive, frankly, to put a bill on people's auto insurance after a first or second offense. By the third time, people should know better, and it is very dangerous. Another issue, Ray, that came up during the debate, and this came up last session as well, is there are some important, racial elements to this, which are important because it creates another predicate for pulling people over. And there were legitimate concerns raised over the course of several years about, for example, disparities in how this law might be applied. So there's been a lot of work in both chambers to get to the heart of that. And so, for example, there's a requirement in the bill of data sharing for law enforcement so that the state will be able to know, for example, if there is a disparity in how the law is being applied among racial or ethnic groups.
And how that data is compiled, there's a bit of a difference between the Senate and House bill, correct?
And the Senate bill came out much more strongly in favor of working to prevent racial profiling. The House bill does have some data collection, but the Senate bill actually requires data to be collected at all stops, which is a really important difference. So even if a fine is not issued, even if a ticket isn't issued, we would still be collecting that data. I am much more in support of the Senate version that came out, and so I'm hopeful that in conference committee we'll go with what the Senate came up with.
Senator Lesser mentioned this, that he's optimistic. Are you as optimistic that, given the circumstances and the number of fatalities and injury-related accidents, that this is the session or the year that this bill will be passed, go onto the governor's desk, and he'll sign it into law?
I do think that this will be the year. Yes, I'm very confident. My sole concern is that we make sure that that racial profiling component is as strong as it possibly can be, because otherwise, we're actually going to be creating harm with the legislation, which is not the goal.
Can you talk a little bit about the testimony that was given before hearings on Beacon Hill? Understand that there was some pretty compelling and dramatic testimony from family members involving loved ones who either killed or injured in connection with distracted driving. What was some of that testimony like that you heard?
Yeah, well, so for example, in the Senate debate that just happened a few weeks ago, we actually had in the gallery many family members of loved ones who had died in car accidents related to distracted driving. In fact, there was one family that was holding the picture of their child who had died in an accident as a result of distracted driving. And Ray, about 10 years ago, the state did pass an anti-texting or no texting while driving law. But unfortunately, the feedback we got from law enforcement and from just common sense, I think, if you're out in the community, out on the roads, is it's impossible to enforce because you don't know whether someone is texting or whether they're on Facebook or whether they're checking their email or whether they're using Google Maps or whatever while they're on their phone. So the law really needed to be expanded and updated to take that into account.
Now, this kind of distracted driving bill has been brought up before in the legislature, yet it's never been passed. What was the holdup in the past, and what has changed now?
I could speak to that, having been, worked on this on the Transportation Committee last session and even the session before. I think that there were legitimate concerns around, around the predicate this would create for unfair enforcement of traffic stops. We know, for example, that people of color are much more likely to be pulled over than others, and there was a concern expressed, and I think a very important concern, that this could be applied unfairly. That took some time to work its way through. There were issues, for example, about the intensity of the enforcement and the scope of the fines, whether or not it would be surchargeable with auto insurance. The Senate did pass the legislation last session. Unfortunately, it wasn't taken up by the House. I think a big change that's important for Western Mass is our own Joe Wagner from Chicopee, who was a former chair of the Transportation Committee and was involved with passing the texting bill 10 years ago, is now on the conference committee and kind of took over the process in the House. So I think you've seen a lot of movement since then. And it's just been too long. And frankly, it's very dangerous, and we need the culture around distracted driving to change as well.
And Representative Sabadosa, distracted driving has been described as an epidemic during these hearings. Would you agree? Is it that serious a problem?
It was certainly described as an epidemic when the when the Secretary of Transportation came into the committee and described the legislation. But I will say that the bulk of the testimony at the Transportation Committee this time was not really about how distracted driving is an epidemic, but really was about the racial profiling component, which I agree is what held this bill up in the past. And I think one of the biggest changes that we saw is Representative Rushing, who had been a member of leadership, did not return to the House. And this had really been a cause that he championed. And we did see a racial profiling component added. It was not part of the original bill the governor submitted. In fact, in committee, I reserved my rights to vote on the bill because that component was not there. It was redrafted later on to include that, but I think that Representative Rushing not being in the building really changed the conversation about this, and it didn't come through quite as strongly as we needed on the House side.
Now that it's passed the House and the Senate, goes on to a conference committee, then onto the governor's desk. You're both optimistic it will pass. Any idea when the governor may receive it on his desk and when this might be signed into law? Any kind of time frame?
There's generally not time frames on conference committees. What I will say is, this is a bill that's really been baked. Both sides have been working on this for a long time. The July 31st is sort of historically the deadline of the first half of the session, and then the legislature goes out until after the Labor Day holiday. So, cautiously optimistic, hopeful that after the budget's complete, hopefully by the end of June, you're going to see several conference committees come to completion, hopefully before July 31.
And Massachusetts won't be the first state. I think it's like 19 other states have enacted this, so this is not something that's entirely new to Massachusetts.
Including all of our surrounding states, Vermont, New York, and Connecticut all have distracted driving bills that are significantly stronger than the ones Massachusetts has on the books right now.